All right, thank you everyone for making it to the advisory council meeting today. We have a fair amount of topics to cover. Um, so with that, we'll just kind of dig in and get started. So quickly, the agenda is kind of sticking to its usual format. We'll go through some of the introductions as a measure of way of taking attendance, give opportunity for public comment, and then we'll dig into uh, GIS office updates, and then kind of have um, brief and not so brief discussions on some of the some topics that we would like some advice on from the council. So with that said, let's get into the introductions and get started. My apologies. All right, so we'll go down the list in order. Just kind of introduce yourself and acknowledge you're here. So I will start. I'm Fred Herrera. I'm the Geographic Information Officer.
I'm next.
Yes.
Right. I'm Scott Call. I'm Chief Data Officer. I'm going to go off camera to eat briefly, but I'll be back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stuart Deland. I'm a GIS admin for CT Deep. I am just getting a green screen, I guess, when I turn on my webcam, so you're going to have to listen to my voice instead of see me today.
I'm Liz Congo from CTDOT, and yeah.
Gary Archambault, Public Health.
Eric Snowden, Capital Region Council of Governments.
Mark Hoover at MetroCog.
Hi, John Guskowski from Tyche Planning and Policy Group, representing CCM.
I think Tracy indicated that she was unable to make the meeting this time, so I think we skip ahead.
Okay, Emily Wilson, Yukon.
Pete Samperi, I'm the Supervisor GIS Operations at UI.
Megan McGaffin from SLR Consulting for the General Assembly.
Dan, I think we skipped you.
Oh, just me? Sorry, I had my mute on once again. Dan Chaya, CTDESPP.
All right, thank you. That's everybody but one. That's excellent. All right, so I'm going to go through some quick introductory remarks, and then we'll get stuck in. So first and foremost, as you know, we were at the Esri Users Conference in July this year because we won a SAG award. So I just wanted to kind of put out the picture and kind of acknowledge my team and all of the great work they've done, inclusive of David Lukens, who's no longer with the team here. We won the award generally for just doing all of the work that we have been doing, setting up the GIS office, and was generally being awesome. So it was a very kind of proud moment, and I'm very happy and proud of our team for having achieved this. So without further ado, is anyone in the public have any comments or things that they would like to say? That would be a great time. All right. So don't have any kind of administration tasks for the council this time around. We may have some for the next one. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So we'll once again skip ahead of this, and we'll just go into the GIS office updates, starting with Carl in the imagery updates.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Go ahead. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got controls here. All right. Yeah, so we've made a lot of progress on the quality assessment and quality control for the imagery and LiDAR. Emily Wilson's on the call, and kudos to her. We now have an imagery service up and running. I'll show you the URL. If you need to grab it, go to the Yukon Clear, SUTI Eco site for imagery services. It's both 3 and 4 band. I'm not going to show you, but I actually have ArcGIS Pro with the web service running on my machine right now. So if we have anyone who wants to see what it looks like at the end, I can show you that. We review the true orthos, and the true orthos are a process by which the oblique imagery, where the imaging device comes in from the side, it gets corrected, and it gives you a vertical, a truly vertical nadir product. Gets produced. You can see on the left, I'm going to go back to the previous slide, Alfredo, afterwards, but you can see on the left, this is without correction. On the right is with correction. And not only do you get the lack of distortion, but if you look at the small image on the bottom there on the right, you can see areas that were otherwise covered up. So for emergency management applications where it's important to be able to see around the entire building, these are really useful. Also, it's going to be having these for bridges for DOT is also a lot of value. We finished the LiDAR and DM review for block 3 and 4, and those were mostly of very high quality. Alfredo, can you give me back control?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I just have to go through the list here.
Oh, I don't think I can't see your slide moving. Is why.
Oh, okay. Well,
which slide would you like?
The previous slide.
Yes, that's
Thank
one.
you. Yeah,
Yep.
for some reason my controls keep flashing in on. I'll let you know when we need to go forward. The last big remaining item is that we have 3D buildings to review. I'll show you what those look like now. We've got the most recent test pilot, and after an extensive and somewhat exhaustive effort on the 2D buildings, where many of the people on this call and others all over the state have spent a lot of time reviewing and improving the 3D buildings, we have reached the end of that process. One final process that we're going to undergo is that as part of the next step of this work, we're going to work with Ecopia on producing an impervious cover data set, and they produce a building footprint process, and they are going to basically QA against the Dewberry building footprints, which should give us another level of improvement. Basically, what we're doing is we're taking the LiDAR-based building footprints and comparing it against optical drive using deep learning, and there'll be some another level of adjustments. So we've had several tweaks. We're hoping that each tweak gets us closer to a high degree of accuracy. In the end, we'll let you know where we're at, but the buildings have definitely improved. Next slide, please, Alfredo. Mention the true orthos. Again, the key thing here is that you can see under the overhang of a building with the true ortho correction. Next slide. Here is an example of how the 3D buildings are working. So upper right is the imagery. Upper left is open street map base footprint. And then we have the 3D extraction. So the 3D buildings are more than just a simple extrusion. They actually include a lot of detail in the dormers and tops of buildings. Next slide, please. Here's a really nice example. If you look at the third or fourth building from the bottom, you can see there's kind of this X pattern in the dormer, and you'll see that the 3D footprint, how nicely it's picked up in that example. It's not perfect, and we're going to, as part of the qualitative process, we're going to identify any consistency errors, but there are some really good examples where complicated rooftops are being captured, and we're hoping that we'll be able to use this in visualization processes for planners and engineers. Next slide, please. Again, this is where the imagery service resides on CT Eco. Please start using it. The true orthos have not yet been incorporated, so that's the last piece to be added, but the rest of the service is available. Next, please. I just grabbed these from, I loaded the service onto my laptop, and you can see that we have some excellent detail. You can see the individual boulders in the riprap at the lake. I thought the lower right-hand corner is interesting because we're going to be looking at acquiring some line detail in this Ecopia effort, and you can actually track the quality of the line work through the center line of the road with this data set. So there's some really nice detail, and you can scale all the way up and all the way back down. Next slide, please. Here's we're getting close to the final delivery schedule. Ortho imagery is now delivered. The LiDAR and DEMs are essentially done. We are going to waiting for a final complete composite delivery of all that data. We've begun doing some beta testing on it for other products. Building footprints, the review is finished and we'll receive the final 2 blocks. That is the central part of the state, which is like 750 or 800,000 buildings, and the eastern part, which is a much larger geographic area, much smaller count in the next 3 weeks. We will also get true ortho corrections very shortly. And then the kind of derivative products are going to trickle out over the next couple months, including a town level ortho mosaic, and then the contours, GIS data, and 3D buildings later in the fall. Next slide, please. And then for that, are we going to take questions now, or are we going to wait to the end, Alfredo? So if you have any questions now, please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end. Alfredo, you're on mute.
Yeah, Mark Cooper, go ahead.
Just quick question. How are those like 3D buildings and building footprints going to be available? Are they going to be download services or both?
To be honest, we are working it out. We can certainly give, I know you have a strong interest in the building footprints. At the very minimum, we can give them, we can trade drives. We can also look to have a service produced. And with that service, hopefully a download. But to be honest, since we haven't received the full data set, we're still working on the mechanics behind that. But, if you need to reach out and get a data set, the first thing was we can just give you the data you need for MetroCog.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, well, let's transition to broadband, and Ashley Benitez will be giving that update.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ashley Benitez here, GIS coordinator at the GIS office. My updates are going to be pretty short. So let's start with broadband mapping. Next, we are currently in the process of data requests to internet service providers. And for those that you don't know, we're requesting data on 2 things: availability and adoption of broadband internet service, and that includes download and upload speeds across the state. Currently, we are asking the internet service providers to submit the data that they have submitted to the FCC in March 2024, and that would be the data as December 31st, 2023. We have on a list of 10 ISPs total, and 7 have submitted already. The deadline is tomorrow, so we hope that they all submit by tomorrow, and I'm confident that they will do. If not, we'll give them some time, but because they are currently submitting to the FCC. And that's why then we're going to open another window for submission mid-September, and that's when they're going to submit the latest submission to the FCC, and that's what we're calling the Fabric version 5. And this data will be as current as June 30th, 2024. As a reminder, there's some definitions there. Availability tell us the presence of broadband internet service, and also, the minimum standard for speed and the quality for a location, and that's how we determine how locations that lack access to fixed broadband or that are served or underserved So basically unserved would be 25 download and 3 upload, and like underserved would be less than 100 download and 20 upload. And adoption, it tells us a little bit about, where there's like fixed broadband available, but there's no subscription. And it tells us a little bit more about like why, and it helps us to or guide us into identifying like some barriers to adoption in certain places where availability, where there's availability. Anyway, that's all in this one. Next. Now into parcel and camera data update. This is my other half. Next. Okay, so we did receive parcel and camera data from all 9 COGs this year. And so we're currently doing our initial processing. 7 of 9 COGs have been processed already by Leah. And so once we process it, we're going to be consolidating in a single parcel dataset similar to last year. And we're also going to produce a compliance report. We also this year started asking from some metadata. Thank you for everybody that has submitted that information. This year we have 154 towns that have submitted parcels and 120 that have adhered to the parcel standards. So thank you so much for working on this, for your willingness to get your data into the standard schema, so we can have a good solid parcel data layer. And for CAMA, this year is the first year that for the first time, all 169 towns have submitted CAMA data. And 141 and so far we have checked for the assistant of the suppression field in the CAMA for the CAMA compliance, and 141 of them have complied with that addition to the submission. And some numbers here. 52 of these 140 towns that have complied with the submission. 52 do not suppress information, and 28 are out of compliance or didn't added the submission of suppression. And I think that's all for me. Any questions? Oh, I forgot one other detail. So, with this processing, we're also analyzing the data because soon, we're very close to having opening a process for parcel and CAMA data improvements, and in this process, we're delineating those funding priorities for this grant that is going to come from OPM, and so we're working with the COGS to see to see how to level this this priority. So if you haven't heard from me yet or from Alfredo, you will be hearing from us pretty soon. Feel free to contact me if you want to like have a conversation right away, but I'll be contacting you. Me or Alfredo will be contacting you pretty soon. See a question there?
So to clarify the question, so there's 54 towns that indicated in the metadata survey that they do not have suppressed records.
Yes.
And then out of those, 28 have indicated that they have, but they did not have the suppression field integrated, so therefore they didn't comply with the requested additional field. We are still working with the CAMA vendors in those respective parts to try and resolve that issue. This one is very important, which is why we're trying to get it solved. So still have some conversations to go, but we still have enough data to kind of really start some of the preliminary.
Thank you.
So parcel standard is forthcoming. Those will we will begin development on that most likely in January. Anything else? Move on. Sarah, I think you're up next.
All right. Hi everyone. So we have been working on putting together publishing guidelines for publishing data to the geodata portal. We just want to make sure that we have guidance for the process, and also some universal standards so that the public data on the portal is complete and consistent. So I'm just gonna quickly walk through the outline of what this guidance is gonna look like. So it's going to start with connecting to the geodata portal, preparing data to publish, metadata standards, projecting data to an appropriate coordinate system, and then actually publishing the data. There will be there will be a lot more details in the actual guidance document once it's published, but this is just a quick overview of what that's going to look like. So the first step is going to be to connect your agency to the CT Geodata portal on ArcGIS Online. So this is done on AGOL, and this will allow you to publish your data independently to your own portal, but then that data gets federated to our central Geodata portal. So the next step is preparing the data. And so that's a process that involves inspecting the quality of the data so that it's ready to be published publicly. So this would include steps like checking the spatial accuracy of the data, checking the accuracy of the attributes, making sure that the data is complete, and then keeping track of the data and its whole creation process through documentation. So obviously you all know that metadata creation is very important because it gives context about what's in the data. When the data is going to be published publicly to the geodata portal, we want it to include a descriptive title, and then a short description that includes key details about the data. And then a more detailed summary that's going to cover things like the scope and significance of the data. And then we're going to want everything to have a thumbnail so that the data can be displayed in layout cards. So we will put together a standard for thumbnails as well that will come later. And then all data should have the appropriate tags. And so in the guidance, that will be, we'll lay out a more detailed list of tags we want all the data to include. And then the portal has a bunch of categories. So we want all the data to be in one of the category buckets that we have on the portal. So that's things like imagery, broadband, boundary data, transportation data. So there's a whole bunch of predefined categories. So then when you're publishing the data, we want it's important to pick an appropriate coordinate system for it. AGOL automatically publishes data to Web Mercator unless you specify it otherwise. According to the Connecticut General Statutes, the official coordinate system for Connecticut is the Connecticut State Plane 2011 coordinate system. And later in this meeting, we're going to have a discussion to talk in more detail about the coordinate system publishing on the portal. And then lastly, we're going to include some guidance on steps and best practices of actually publishing the data. So when you do publish data to AGOL, you can do it through a variety of avenues, like through ArcGIS Pro or directly on AGOL, or you can publish it, through Python or R. So we're going to just walk through steps, and if there are decisions along the way, how we would guide publishers to make those decisions. And so, like I said before, we're just working on getting this guidance document polished, and we should be able to release it soon. But in the meantime, let us know if you have any feedback or questions, or anything that you would particularly like to see in the guidance.
So if anybody have questions? Publisher and guidance for the, yeah.
Could you say that again, Alfredo? I couldn't hear you.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's really muffled.
Sorry, my headphones are probably. So yeah, no, I was just asking if there anybody had any questions on the publication guidance and all of the stuff that Sarah just went. So I think Aaron Nash in the chat asked if there was going to be a group for this. There can be a group. I don't know that we were planning to have one for this particular topic. This one was one that we were just kind of working through functionally. It is an extension of the GIS Clearinghouse group, I would say. You know, we will likely ask that group to maybe kind of take a look at these guidelines in the context of the greater work group document that they've already been working. And yes, we did kind of mention a thumbnail standard. That's definitely something that we'll have to kind of discuss further. That's still very much in development. So there's certain elements of these kind of guidelines that are closer to kind of being done than others. So I think that the idea is to kind of publish a version that has like the stuff that we're much more comfortable with first, and then kind of make additional make additions if needed. Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I apologize if I missed it, but who's the audience for publishing some of these, and how are you defining if they're the authoritative data source for it to be included on the state geodata portal? This isn't open to anybody who has a layer, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think one of the kind of the central criteria is for inclusion in the geodata portal, and it's been thus far kind of an unofficial decision, but like we're wanting to kind of include it in as part of this document is really we want to make sure that it's statewide data. It's not just like a single town or a cog. That it fits in the context of entirety of Connecticut, so that it's kind of there. Otherwise, it should kind of, you know, there are reasons why we might want to include it. You know, that's still kind of open for debate. But for right now, the intent is really statewide data and, you know, state agencies primarily, but, you know, there is some room for discussion for some other parties to contribute.
So maybe this could be part of this document that Sarah's working on, or part of the clearinghouse document, which I'm also quite familiar with, but like how to determine what that is, or the some criteria that should be met. So that's just something I guess we should keep in mind.
Yep.
And before somebody puts a lot of time into doing this, making sure that their data set is appropriate for the geodata portal.
Right. Makes sense. Greg?
Yeah, thanks. And just to kind of build on Emily's point, I think you guys have done a little bit of this, but it's been informal, right? Because back on data.ct.gov, there used to be several different data sets that came up related to, I'll say, bus stops and bus routes, right? And that was based on the fact that some of those came from Connecticut DOT, some of those, I'm using an example because it's us. Some of those came from us, some of those came from CT Transit. And I think the desire here is through an identified process to basically say, look, this is transportation related data. This is Department of Public Health data. We're going to rely on them to compile in the way that makes sense for them on a statewide basis, and then use those compiled data sets to be the authoritative ones coming in, right? You don't want to pull necessarily from each one of those, but instead have us do that and then provide on behalf of the state to the geodata portal. That's at least the goal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it's been working, like you said, informally thus far. I think part of our effort with this documentation is to kind of write that down and make sure that we all follow the same rules in a consistent manner. Scott?
Just muted myself, sorry. So one of the things we've done historically for other state data, and that we've used to feed into the open data portal, and Pauline, who manages this, is not on the call today, but she could speak to it a little better. We inventory all the data that's collected through state agencies. GIS World's a little different because not all of it is through state agencies, but just for that person, inventory it and then list out for that data set, like what, what's the agency that's the steward of it, what's the staff person, and then really like what's the statutory basis for it. So like to use Greg's example, if it's bus stops, is it like DOT is the agency that collects bus stops? Why does DOT collect bus stop data or maintain bus stop data? It's because it's, pursuant to Connecticut General Statute section, blah, blah, blah. And DOT, is the agency that is the authoritative resource for bus stops. And so that's like the building block, is just sort of inventorying, like, what are these data sets? Where do they come from? Why are we collecting them in one fashion? And then you can always go back to that to say, like, okay, is this the source for that data? But that inventorying or cataloging or whatever you want to call it process, that's sort of been the basis for it for a lot of the other state data, which has not prevented sort of like the proliferation of people going and publishing 5 different versions of bus stops data. But then we can go back and sort of police it and clear some of those things out. So I know GIS is like a little bit different for that, because for a lot of other administrative data, it's very clear like one agency is sort of the agency that collects or publishes that data, and it's a little less clear for some of the GIS data where you can go and observe it or see it in the outside world. But like State Department of Education collects data on students. It's, you can't, nobody else is really doing that. But some of the GIS data, it's a little less clear. But that inventorying we've gone to as like a backbone for some of those questions about the authoritative nature data set.
Go ahead, Greg.
And just to add, I mean, we've been doing that internally at DOT, and I'm sure the other agencies have been as well, right? And where it gets a little dicey, Scott, that process works great. And that's great for identifying clear roles and responsibilities for things that fall within something that's statutorily defined, right? Where it gets a little dicier is when you start having you mentioned like student information, right? Well, if student information then gets tied to public bus routes that are picking them up, like now we've got these cross agency assets, and how do those get kind of defined and managed? And it might end up being where some agencies are stewards not of the asset itself, but of individual attribution on a parent asset, right? And just that's where I love the effort to kind of standardize some of the metadata and getting that stuff up and identified and clearly conveyed to the user so that they understand where the source is, because there's going to be a variety of sources that kind of feed into what we would consider a single authoritative data set. The ones that clearly are identified by statute are kind of the low-hanging fruit. We should definitely prioritize those, but it's going to get more complex as we kind of move through this.
Yeah, one of the examples of this that we already had is the municipal data set that you guys publish. It's DOT and the surveys division is responsible for the delineation of boundaries, but OPM is kind of responsible for saying what's in those boundaries. So, already we have kind of encountered those kinds of situations, and, just have to take them as on a case by case basis. But I think if we have a good framework for how to deal with those situations.
And even within there, Alfredo, like we talked with CT Deep about mean high tide levels and things like that, right? Like working so that we identify a steward and then identify what the processes are. That was a nice effort, honestly.
Yeah. Megan?
Thank you. I was wondering, for data that has a like a spatial component on the Connecticut Open Data Portal, but that may not be yet spatial, are things like that going to be converted, or like how like you go on Connecticut Open Data and you can like see it either as an Excel or get it as a JSON or shapefile or whatever. Is there going to be continuity between the GeoData portal and the Open Data portal?
Yeah, so as of right now, everything that is on the GeoData portal is automatically federated with the Open Data portal. So if it is a GIS data set, it's on the Open Data portal, that comes across automatically. Now, the inverse is not always true. And we have been addressing those on a case-by-case basis because it's usually a more involved process of kind of quote spatializing that data to make sure that it's done in a correct and appropriate manner. So we want to make sure that you don't just kind of like geocode it and, you know, proverbially throw the spaghetti against the wall, because we want to make sure that it's done correctly and under, you know, best practices, if you will, from the GIS community as well.
Thanks.
Any other questions on this topic? All right, we'll move on to our discussion topics. So really, we're going to go over three different things. The first one is kind of address standards and issues. And Carl is going to kind of give a lot of background and then kind of have some questions for the council to kind of get a sense. We'll then have a little bit more of a further discussion on the coordinate systems and the state coordinate systems. And then we will kind of solicit some feedback and ideas for training and outreach. So with that, I will yield to Carl to talk about addressing.
Okay, Alfredo, thank you. Next slide, please. So recently, there's been a discussion at the GAC about how to go about creating frameworks for standards. This discussion is a follow-up on that from previous meetings. And basically, I'm going to provide some background on address standards and then some potential issues, and then we'll leave it to the council to discuss next steps going forward. Forward, next, please, Alfredo. The statute does point the OPM and DAPA and the GIS office to providing a role in coordination of standards. And as part of that, we're supposed to talk with our stakeholders with the intention of providing coordination and efficient use of the data. Next, please. And so basically, I'm just going to talk a little bit about issues and the benefits. Some of the existing standards in addressing, and then some thoughts on where to go next. Next, please. So in the state, addressing is typically used for a wide variety of uses, but they involve, of course, the traditional mail delivery. It's critical for state operations, things like taxation or other city and state services. We have Dan on the line. Addressing is vital in life and death for call routing and emergency management. Then there's sort of the derivative GIS enablement or a spatialization, where you take an address and turn it into a GIS product, which then releases a bunch of other GIS techniques or analyses. And then it is a critical component in administrative data, where you can match it with, in a probabilistic sense, with other similar records to join records for different kinds of operational or internal research or analysis. Next, please. Kind of the two big authoritative addressing data sets, standards are the United States Postal Service, something called Publication 28. And then you've already learned about the FGDC, which is the federal data standards. They have a very big standard. And then the NINA standard for 911 purposes. Of those, the NINA standard is the most GIS intensive. And then there's a variety of ongoing and growing industry approaches. One is Overture Maps, which is an effort by ESRI, Meta, Amazon, and others to create basically a global system of addressing housing and other data sets. And their whole intention, and there are others doing this as well, is to make all GIS data interoperable, and they're doing it at global scales. Soon, this may become a de facto standard, but right now they're kind of competing with the other standards that are out there. Next, please. So the USPS standard publication 28 is really the most authoritative, and it is been traditionally used for delivery. The little graphic on the right is kind of your classic letter format you stick on an envelope. However, this the standard is modern enough so it actually takes in account validation and maintenance tools. And critically, you have to be able to update the address and maintain it to make it effective. And this is potentially a critical issue going forward that might be addressed in this addressing standard. Next. The federal government has their own standard. It also includes the U.S. Postal Service and a variety of other standards. It's kind of a synthesis, very large. If you look at the actual document, it is almost 500 pages long. It does account for a whole bunch of complex issues. Some of them that are critical are things like thoroughfare addressing. That is, like if you exist at the intersection of something, landmark addressing, like you put a name of a school on an envelope and then send it out. And so this is a really comprehensive approach that the feds have taken on with addressing standards. Next, please. So what is the benefit of a standard? It is pretty, old hat, but first thing is it's a critical component for government and industry operations. It improves interoperability and data sharing. The hope is that it reduces processing and analysis time and makes geocoding, which is this conversion of address into geographic points, simpler and have higher quality. A variety of data improvements and the addition of a scoring of how good your data is, your addressing data. And then, as I mentioned before, we want to be able to use a standard to help maintain, improve the data over time as part of a data lifecycle. Next, please. So we're going to look at two different cases, and the reason I'm doing it this kind of graphically is to show when you're thinking about the data, the address standard, what the complexities are. The first case is sort of your standard addressing system. Think of this as the postal delivery model. And here's 3 addresses in Avon.
One sec.
Yeah. Should I continue?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. And even a simple model includes the zip +4, and then it might also include ranges, the landmark, thoroughfare, and then PO boxes. And you'll see that there are over 30,000 PO boxes in Connecticut. So that's not an inconsequential subtlety. Next, please. But you very quickly get out of that simple kind of traditional postal model into something more complicated. If you have an address, then you can have a geocoded address. If you have a geocoded address, then you have a lat long point, which then allows you to bring in complementary GIS data. And if you have an address, you might also be able to link it to other information that it was within the adjacent parcel, like buildings and unit number. And I know for a parcel, the unit is a very critical issue. And then once you have a name associated with an address, then potentially you could link other things like client names and social service information. So there's a whole variety of complexity that you could potentially include in this addressing standard. And you also want to be able, again, to maintain it and change it and identify the quality of this data as you utilize this system. Next, please. So this was kind of, you saw some introductory information. I want to give you the kind of 4 components of a address standard. And this comes from the it comes from the FGDC model. So they are data content, data classification, data quality, and data exchange. Next, please. So the data content is basically all the components, and we just started talking about this, that could potentially be in an addressing model. They're the obvious ones like street number and name, but there are more complex or unusual ones like the large area geography, which is, do you want to be able to know your zip code or your state or your or other kinds of geography? You should also have a unique identifier for each address, and then some kind of life cycle status, that is the status of the address. Next, please. Data classification is about the syntax and style data. So the components were in the previous slide, but now you want to be able to, you have a variety of formats. I grabbed 2 lists, which are at least 15 different address formats right here that you can grab online at any time. And the thing about the syntax and structure of this is very critical for automation. And that's what, going forward to future-proof address data, you want to be able to have a standard that can be parsed and moved around in a database or other kinds of automation. And so this data classification, the syntax is very important to facilitate that process. Next, please. Because part of the data, the geocoding process, you also want to be able to evaluate the quality of the data, and so you have you want to have a scoring ability to qualitatively assess your data. ESRI has one in their software. Socrata, for instance, doesn't. Both the U.S. Postal Service and FGC in their own standards have a data quality attribute, and so the data quality allows you to evaluate how good your match would be against existing data. Next, please. And then the final component is this ability to track data, your addressing across systems. And this is one, and Dan maybe can speak to this later, but if you have a 911 system, you want to know when you have new data added, new addresses added and taken away. And so you want to be able to track those changes in your system. And this, of course, is vitally important for an automation because you want to be able to know when you've added or subtracted data into an authoritative system. Next, please. And I'll just go through a bunch of these big picture discussion issues that might be part of an address standard. First one is using geocoding. The geocoding obviously adds a geographic component. It releases and allows new sets of analyses from it. It's critical for different kinds of operation. And there's also an equity issue. It turns out there's been some studies that have suggested that geocoding does not work as well in underserved neighborhoods, like in urban areas or areas with high population density. So that's a potential issue with geocoding. Next, please. You want to have the ability to have interoperable data and use it in probabilistic matching, which is important for administrative purposes. In administrative systems and social services do things like program evaluation and cohort analysis, and those are critical tools for operations in certain kinds of agencies and municipalities. Next, please. 911 is a life and death application of an address standard, and it's more deeply integrated into GIS than some of the other traditional uses, but the standard should support this use and make it efficient and allow for address improvement. Next, please. And then I mentioned the PO box. It turns out we used our parcel data set. I found 36,000 PO boxes in Connecticut. So you need to be able to accommodate the fact that not every address system follows a traditional number, street, town, zip code style. Next, please. And then this is some of the quirks of the state system, but it turns out we have a variety of different ways of talking about location and addresses in our state websites. I found 3 different ones on a quick search. So having some kind of standard way of representing addresses would also be useful in a visual sense. Next, please. So going forward, this is basically a background on what are some of the big picture issues in addressing an address standard. A likely path forward would be to have a work group or a subject matter expert create recommendations. You would want to check to see what different agencies and municipalities and other stakeholders are using and what might be important for the future. And then, the group of the SME would create a standard that would be presented to stakeholders, reviewed, and approved. Next, please. Here's a long list of the references I used for this presentation, including the publication 28 in FGDC. They're very long, but the executive summaries are very useful, so I would check those out. Some of the stuff at the bottom is interesting if you're a GIS professional and you want to learn more about how geocoding is being used. Next, please. Finally, I'm going to open it up to the discussions from the advisory council, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to have direct questions for me. But otherwise, we'd love to hear what you think and where we should go forward with this. Thank you.
Mike, go ahead.
Thanks. I love this topic. I was not aware that the larger tech firms were looking at developing a globalization standard. That kind of makes sense given their reach. Has there been, in your research, did you find anything that would indicate maybe collaboration or coordination with that standard against, say, the USPS or the NINA standard?
I don't know that there are a lot of entities, both private and public, working with the Overture and others. I don't know. I think they're currently are mostly separate, as far as I can tell. The thing I will say about these private efforts, like Overture, is these are all global tech companies that are participating in. They now have 2.4 building footprints. They have hundreds of millions of addresses. They're operating everywhere, and what they're trying to, they're going to grow, and they're going to probably kind of start bumping into the other standards. So eventually those are going to need to be reconciled because people are going to use them. Amazon delivers all over the world. ESRI is a global center. So these are obviously going to be picked up by commercial entities. So don't know when, I don't know what the convergence is going to happen, but it is a ongoing trend that's rapidly, the tech companies are rapidly building out a global GIS infrastructure that includes addressing. And the point for them is they want to integrate everything together into a single schema.
Which we do too. Right. I mean, and I think that, lots of times I think people come to the addressing conversation typically with kind of one particular focus in mind, whether it's commercial delivery, public safety, residential there's whatever. But there's such a wide range in how places are identified. I think in the case for this, because we're a small state, 3 million people, I would just say that perfect would be the enemy of good in our situation, but providing the best public benefit probably would make sense. But yeah, there's probably a lot to kind of mull over here.
Yep.
Anyone else have questions, concerns, or comments?
I have another question. The census, the U.S. Census, I know they don't share their addressing information, but do you know what standard they use?
They are actually they actually are the one running the FGDC standard. So they're tightly involved in that. I didn't put them up there because they are basically the maintainer for the FGDC standard. But they are tightly involved in this process.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have Dan and then Dan, go ahead.
So just so I have it straight and everyone else, this is working on a data management standard, not a standard on how a town should address their stuff, just how do we store what they give us in an efficient manner.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I think asking municipalities to kind of do what they need to do in a particular way is a much longer and more conversation. Maybe it is one that we could and should have, but I think right now, I think it's more practical for us to kind of say, okay, let's see what the universe of everything is, and it's like, how do we actually kind of like make sense of it so that we as data professionals and geospatial data professionals can actually do something with that information.
Okay.
Aaron, did you still have any questions?
Yeah, the Geospatial Information Systems Council had started a draft standard like a decade ago. Is there any thought to try to capture that old work that was done and use that as a baseline to get started?
That's a great suggestion.
I didn't know about it, and I appreciate the reference, and I'll take a look.
Yeah. Hey, Carl.
I might have a copy of that somewhere.
I have copies of it.
We worked on it with that. I mean, that's basically, I think we used the FGDC standard at the time to do it. And it's basically what I used as my beginning to create the address point database for the 911 system. That's what I used. But then I switched over because I've been checking that FGDC standard hasn't been touched in like 14 years. And I honestly don't know. I don't know how much it's being taken care of. I mean, I'm hopefully it's being taken care of. I don't know, but
yeah.
And because I do know like Nina created their own standard, and Nina was one of the sponsors of it. But we switched over to Nina, but it's all basically the same thing. It's just a matter of nomenclature and stuff like that for those things. But we could dust that off, or use Nina or whatever.
I mean, I think the goal would be, this is my personal opinion, the goal would be to have the most inclusive list with the least amount of attributes, which is a little bit self-contradictory, I agree, but you don't want to have 500 pages because that's unworkable, like the full FGDC list, but you want to have enough so that you can account for issues with automation and maintenance as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. I mean, a lot of those fields, like they did a thing for every single thing in the country where, we don't have certain sorts of addressing in Connecticut. They got some Western style of addressing, like we don't really need that. And it's as long as you make the data flexible enough in the fields, it doesn't matter. Like if some state wants our data for some, or, Google wants it for something, you give it to them and say, here's our fields. You can map your stuff to these fields and it works. You can call it street name. You can make it, as big or small as you want for like a field size, as long as it works. It doesn't, it's pretty simple. As long as you break it up enough, that's the only thing, and then you can do breaking up numerous ways. You could break it up at the database layer like I do, or you could create a street name field and just join that to there for your street name, and then you have it simpler. There's a billion ways to do it.
Is that one point of clarification, Carl? You mentioned 36,000 or around that number of PO boxes. Is that mailing address or is that the actual physical address of the parcel?
That was the physical address of the parcel, I believe. No, actually, it was the mailing address.
All right. Yes, I didn't think that was possible. The PO box a house. All right, I just found. All right, thanks.
And you're welcome. I can, if you're curious, I can send you the query I wrote.
Yeah, no, that's I mean that's common with all of the people that travel, the winter snowbirds, whatever they call them. They PO box their mail all over the place.
And we also learned that lawyers like it too.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I want to kind of build a little bit on what Dan was saying, like maintaining it at the most granular level to be able to serve that up. What I will say is we've had varying levels of success, and I'm going to use success in quotes there because it's not really been that successful with providing data specifically to a couple of the vendors that Dan was talking about. So Google, Apple, Waze, those types of, depending on the format that it comes in, they're more willing or less willing to actually work with it. And from a DOT perspective, a lot of our information is so specific to travel that navigation, Google Maps, Waze, obviously Apple Maps are kind of the three behemoths. There's TomTom in here and a few others. But when we try to get them information that we feel is relevant to routing, they sometimes jump right on it. They ask for more, depending on the lift on their end. And then there's other times where they've told us, go work with US DOT, come up with a national standard. We're only going to consume it once. So it's been difficult, and I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. I'm talking about height restrictions on why we keep getting trucks hitting bridges on the Merritt Parkway. They've been just completely non-existent as far as ingesting some of that information, even though there is a relative standard. So just keep in mind, like when we're trying to standardize some of this stuff, there is kind of that national presence that at the very least we might have to do some machinations that actually get it up into that format. And any decisions we make at the lower level need to be able to be supported.
100%. All right. In the interest of leaving time for additional discussions, I'm going to move on to the next point of discussion, which is coordinate systems. So I want to talk about the coordinate systems for the state, as in, the Connecticut General Statutes, Section 13A-255. In particular, there is that last kind of provision in it, Section H, that amongst other things says Connecticut coordinate system SHOP of 83 will be the sole system for new mapping after like 1996 is I think the date that's mentioned there. The one of the things about this statute is it's very written very much in for surveying and for the purposes of surveying. It was last updated in 2003. And as most of us know, web services were not very much a thing back then. So I think, and I think even the GIS industry has changed significantly since then. So I think one of the things I would like to kind of get hear about and people's concerns and their thoughts on is kind of like, how does this relate to the data that we publish on our on the geodata and open data portals, as well as the various other portals, and for the various systems that we use? How does it how does it affect web maps, and how does it affect image services that say CTE, like the ones that CT Eco provides? Bearing in mind that we have both in state and external stakeholders, and stakeholders from every industry and level of kind of technological capability. So some of the initially identified challenges that I've run across, and Greg and I have been back and forth a lot, is first and foremost, if you publish something in NCT state plane on AGOL, it's great and we can use it, but then a lot of the base maps and additional data becomes a little bit harder to actually do when you're talking about using it in just the web environment. You lose access to a lot of the Esri base maps, which, for better or worse, are widely adopted and widely used, which kind of makes it a Web Mercator kind of a de facto standard. But then conversely, if you publish things in Web Mercator, then, especially if you're using industry specific kind of software packages like, DOT's Bentley package that they use for the LRS system, it doesn't have the ability to reproject on the fly or really kind of at all within the framework of the software. So it has to be in the right format to begin with. Which then leads us to the problem of we have to maintain two different services, and anybody that has had to do that knows that that's no easy task. Sometimes, especially when you're talking about a very large data set, there's a lot of kind of computational and storage requirements and implications that kind of start cropping up that, with like a small service of like a couple hundred records, it's not a big deal. But when you start talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records, it really requires some thought and intentionality about how we serve these up. And if the coordinate systems and how we measure things are so important, then, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about how we serve these things up. And lastly, like my hope in kind of bringing up to this group is really to kind of get, initial reactions, concerns, comments. Because between this council meeting and the next one, my plan is to go talk to a lot of subject matter experts, at say Esri, at the National Geodetic Survey, various stakeholders from different industries. I want to understand the technological challenges in place and kind of say, hey, we know that there is an updated coordinate system going. We are going to have to make that legislative adjustment to accommodate that because currently the legislation is very specific to NAD 83 state coordinate system. So if we are going to make that change, it is now an opportune time to kind of more generally modernize the whole statute to make sure it's encompassing of, yes, the surveying community, but also the GIS ones. It's, coordinate systems matter to us greatly as well. So I would love to hear from everyone here, kind of any thoughts or concerns or additional comments that can help guide me in my quest to kind of understand this a little better so that when, comes time to kind of make some changes, we are better informed to do so.
Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
I'm confused whether or not the public can talk or it's just people on the committee. I had some comments, but Liz, I'll yield. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I know Alfredo, when we talked, you were talking about doing more research to kind of see where other places were going. I do know just, from my time in the private sector and now at the state, I feel like Web Mercator, in my experience, has been a very strictly Esri based thing. And I think that as the Geodata committee is not strictly an Esri committee, it's really, any sort of CAD based system, anything like that would need, a NAD 83, or, whatever this new one is going to be. So I think it is something worth considering. I've run into a lot of issues with Web Mercator in the past.
Yeah, it's by no means perfect. We talk about, platforms like, Tableau and Cardo and Google, et cetera. They're all using WGS 84 and not Web Mercator. So, it's, on the surface, it's on the very, very tippy top of the surface. It seems kind of simple, but it's like the more you peel back on this, the more complicated it gets, which is why there's a homework between now and October. Aaron, if you have want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm gonna just echo what Liz said, that Web Mercator's meters, state planes feet. I mean, there are, if OPM is going to be authoritative source for data, it should be in a state plane where all state users, if you're developing data for Esri, which is a world-based, they use that because it's world, then maybe it should be a secondary service. But internally, like when I redirect people at CTI to use OPM's data, I'm not expecting Web Mercator, I'm expecting state plane to match up with the town boundary layer. And we selectively use WGS 84 at the DOT for specific projects. So if you're going to create a standard, you have to outline which is which, right? If it's legislative boundaries, it shouldn't be Web Mercator. If it's historic districts, it shouldn't be WGS 84. But if it's well locations, then maybe because it's point data, WGS 84 makes sense because that's how the data is collected. So I think it needs to have some flexibility, but I don't think Web Mercator should be used unless you are pushing it out to some type of outside agency. Thanks.
You're still muted.
Sorry. I would say that in terms of doing the mapping, Aaron is correct that when you create your data, of course, create it in NAD 83. It makes a difference. Until we adopt NatRef 2022, which should be happening fairly soon, and that's going to change this whole conversation. But I think it's one thing to create the data in NAD 83 or NatRef 2022, but in respect for publishing it, if you're going to publish data through a service, using WGS 84 is meant to, make it easier for people to collaborate and coordinate and things like that. When there are software restrictions on, how to consume WGS 84, that just might be the case when using a service isn't the appropriate method. But I think for, compatibility, availability, WGS 84 makes a lot of sense in terms of publishing something online intended to be used online. I mean, that kind of is the home where it lives. But the creation app, there's not much reason to create anything in WGS 84. So it's a tricky conversation. But the NatRef thing too is also, I think, is going to render a lot of this conversation very different fairly soon.
Yep. Greg, go ahead.
Sure. So appreciate you starting this conversation, Alfredo. You and I have had a few discussions on this already. I mean, I go back to basically the purpose of the statute that exists currently, right? And that was focused on spatial accuracy within the bounds of the state, right? That's who we primarily are supposed to service. I 100% can appreciate that there's way more collaborative work happening through web services and people outside the state utilizing our data for things like research and integration, and that's all great stuff. But when we're really looking at the types of things that we're trying to do in order to manage information within the state of Connecticut, I think we want to defer to what we consider to be the standard and most spatially accurate, which within the state bounds of Connecticut would be the state plane coordinate system in feet. So that's why the surveyors have kind of supported it. That's why I know in the statute it kind of designates the state surveyor at DOT to be the one who can update or revise the statute. And we're going to defer to them on a lot of this as we go through and rewrite as any NATRF 22 becomes available. So I'm very leery of a product-based solution, right? Because they can always change. So I'd like to defer as much as possible to like the default of spatial accuracy, which I think we all acknowledge is the state plane, and subsequent adjustments in NATRF 22.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quick question. So with the web Mercator issue, is this an issue of if we want to use like ArcGIS online between ourselves, we have to go to web Mercator, or is this for Esri to push data out into the world, they need it in web Mercator?
They do not. So, well, I mean, they ask
or does
for
it help?
It helps.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
One thing, so like if we were to send them data so that they can syndicate it elsewhere, we can, certainly reproject it and send them the file or set it the service up that way. That part is not hard. I think it's really, making sure that we're doing something consistent and we're doing something accurate, but we're also doing something that the most users on the platforms that they're using have it accessible to them without being a huge inconvenience and or burden. So like some software can't reproject, some can, some, so it's kind of like trying to get some information in. And like I said, I want to have this discussion to kind of better understand what some of those downstream implications are, because I can't possibly know it all.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, I mean, if it's simply a matter of, well, they like it better I'm kind of, I've been thinking about this since yesterday, and it's kind of like with addressing. It's like if we have a standard, like this is our standard, we use NAT 83, and Esri or Google or something wants it differently, that's their problem. Like, okay, well, here's the link, here's the data, whatever it is, convert it. Like it's really, I mean, if NAT 83 is best for us, then that's what we use. But if it's something, unless it's something like we have a vendor, oh, we need it in this for our system, and you're paying them and whatever, and you need to switch it, then fine. I mean, I believe we do that with the 911 system. But If it's just makes, I hate to say it this way, and all due respect to Esri, if it's only making Esri's life easier, then let them deal with it. But unless it's easy for us to convert stuff and then just send it to them that way too. But I hope I'm making sense. I just, if we have to pick one or the other, and our like law says NAD 83, then we stick to NAD 83 and let other people deal with it as they may.
Aaron?
Thanks. Yeah. I remember back in GIS day, there was a student who made a map of Connecticut and she put it in WGS 84. And it was, I think whoever was judging it, it was a map of Connecticut in WGS 84. And if you ever looked at Connecticut in WGS 84, it doesn't look right. So if we're publishing authoritative state data sets and our end user is going to use it from Connecticut, which kind of echoes what Dan said, and Greg, this is our user base, we'd want it to be pushed out in the service or in the projection it was developed. So if we're taking something and building it in NAD 83, converting it to Web Mercator, then publishing it out, we're already distorting our data. So to keep it as accurate and authoritative as possible, it should be in NAD 83. And like Dan said, in those use cases, if I need the state data, I could export it out, reproject it, and publish it for my own use. That's an isolated case. But our CRSMS, which is the system we developed for the DOT, we're trying to pull our administrative boundaries from the authoritative source to eliminate the need for us to host it internally. So having it all in a uniform projection makes sure everything aligns without having to do the math on the fly to slow the system down. So if 80% of our users are internal, then I think it should all match. Thanks.
Yep. Mark, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I guess I just need some clarification on the issue, the main issue with publishing services in NAD 83. Is that just a display thing where it slows down when you have the Esri base maps on?
Well, those to become unavailable generally.
Gotcha. I mean, I tend to agree with Aaron and Dan that we shouldn't be kind of making standards that go towards one software, one product at the moment that requires. I mean, I know Carl said a couple like Google and things use the Web Mercator, but I mean, from a standard standpoint, I think the most accurate data set and the most accurate coordinate system, I mean, is the one we should be going with. I know if we try to be a little more flexible and say, create the data in NAD 83, if you publish a web service, it can be published. I don't know. I think that might get a little murky, just with people just publishing things to ArcGIS Online and things like that. So, I mean, I would go with kind of the state plane route, but that's just my opinion.
Nick?
I was thinking of as a former municipal employee, I was also wondering, would either approach, and I'm going to stop saying NAD 83. I think we should probably just get used to start saying NATREF 2022 because it's just like what's going to be. Do we create an undue burden for our town and municipal staff choosing one versus the other, or having them have need to, like, if they're going to publish something, say their parcels or whatever, or they want to whatever, we should probably seek to avoid undue burden as well for smaller agencies. And I don't know which one that would be.
Sure, that makes sense. Emily?
Yeah, I have a little bit of stake in the game just based on what we have already, which all of our image services are in Web Mercator. The base data has never been reprojected. It's all in the state plane as it was delivered. The last couple in the 2011 version, the other ones earlier, I think 1983. But the reason that was done for all these years is so it does play nice with Esri base maps, all the other services coming the way that things get tiled and the Google tiling scheme, and if you've published large data sets, in order to get them to draw together, it just works better that way. So we have not done an analysis to see if that impacts the accuracy. Like, that's clearly important, but I do think we need to take into account usability, like Megan was saying, for smaller groups, people who won't know what to do when our services won't work with everything else in every other web situation or viewer. So I do think we need to look into it a little bit more for than just picking one.
Scott, and then this will be the last thing before you got to move on.
That's great. Part of my comment is that this is a really great discussion. I think is exactly the purpose of the advisory council, to debate these kinds of questions. It sounds like there is like a healthy debate about it. So that is why we have an advisory council. So it's not one person making a decision. You can get a range of different opinions. Sounds like there's different opinions here. Consistent with the earlier comments, I went back and looked what's the purpose for the advisory council, and I will copy and paste while we're talking. But one of the things that's the statutory role for the advisory council is the processing, coordination, procurement, processing, storage, and distribution of free and public geographic information systems data. So that's, I think, everybody who's on the advisory council, when you're thinking about sort of the role here, that's one of the things to consider. That's that's the way it was written. It's the GIS network, and everybody else who kind of advocated for creation of the advisory council, GIS office, the role. That piece about free and public access to geographic information systems data, that's pretty central for what the council is supposed to be doing. So I think just factor that into how you weigh the decision between the different options here.
All right. Thanks for that. This was a really good discussion. I would like to move on. If it's quick, you can say your piece, Mark.
Just real quick. I mean, with what Scott said, I mean, it seems like if we to kind of go back, I'm going back and forth in my head on this right now too. But I mean, making it free and public, it seems like if you pick one or the other, then it's going to limit some end user. So I can see that side of things too, but I don't know. It's a difficult topic, but we'll leave it for there.
Sure. All right. In the interest of time, just because we've got like 5 minutes left, I'd like to move on to the last topic here, training. Sorry, Eric. We can chime in afterwards if we have time. So this is back to Carl talking about training.
I will keep this very short. Next slide. So we are right now with Emily and Carrie at Yukon Clear doing planning on different types of training that would support the use of our data, the improvement of the general skill level of the stakeholders and GIS professionals, and background information for everyone in the industry. So here is a list of the kind of methods that we would present training on. The first, most obvious one is webinars, but then a whole variety of other informal to formal trainings we could provide. Next slide, please. The first one of these that we're going to do, and again, this is with Carrie and Emily at Yukon Clear, is going to be on the new web image services that Emily has spun up, and this will be in mid-September. Others that are very likely to happen would be housing, parcels, and 3D data. Those would approximately happen every 3 to 4 weeks. Next slide, please. And then what we really want to do is get a response to topics we might be missing. Sorry. Here's a kind of a tentative list of the top 10 or so that we've discussed internally. But in the very few minutes we have remaining, if anyone has additional topics they would like to cover or think is timely, please let us know. That's what was really the focus of this conversation, was to see if there are things here you like, and if we're missing other topics, let us know now so we can get those on the list going forward. Next slide. And last thing is, Carrie and Emily have the Yukon Clear site. We are working to create a consolidated calendar that would be for DAPA and GIS trainings. That is something that we are still exploring, but there needs to be a centralized location so that we could have a consolidated list someplace for a wide variety of data science and GIS trainings. So with that, I'll just hear kind of the big questions, topics, formats or venues, the levels, things that are painful for you right now, and how often training should occur. Any thoughts or ideas you have on this, please let us know either today or through email communication. Thank you.
I would just add how to QA QC your data.
Sure.
Anyone else on this topic? All right. I guess we can briefly circle back to Eric if you had one more thing to add on the last discussion, and then after that we can wrap up.
Okay, I mean, I think some of you are probably thinking of this already. It's just and you've probably already considered it. Is that I can't even think of how many existing viewers, platforms, consultant hosting, municipalities, all that stuff that are currently consuming the CT Eco imagery services in the state that they are now. I mean, often multiple years and everything else. I'm just going through my head about how that would be affected if it was all switched, and certainly possible I'm missing something here too. So
Yep,
that was
Yeah,
a
I'm trying to remember, Eric, because early on in the earlier dates we did state plane. I don't know if we did both. I can't remember if anyone else remembers. But in the last, since the big flights, we've only done Web Mercator, and I have the data download is all still state plane for folks that are really doing need really accurate data sets. So I can't think that I've had any requests for it in a different projection, the services. So I'm totally open to other ideas, but it would have a pretty big impact on that.
All right.
just one thing I wanted to add, Alfredo. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I do
fine.
think it's fantastic that you're thinking about getting ahead of the game with the change in the system coming, because any of us that are old enough to have survived the 27 to 83 stuff, it was interesting. I know the software is better, but it's definitely good to be ahead of this. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of the reason I've been kind of really holding on to this topic for as long as I have recently, just because I know that change is coming and it will be somewhat fraught and probably potentially painful. So, I think the more we think about it and the more kind of careful we are with it, the better off we'll be. Greg?
Yeah, just one last thing. And I know one of the things that we've gone back to is the fact that this was identified within the statute as what we're supposed to use for all new mapping. Post 1996, we're supposed to get rid of the old system, and then we're supposed to use NAT 80 from NAT 27 to NAT 83. And then obviously the DOT was empowered to make revisions when the 2011 revision happened. When we look nationwide, most states within their geographic information systems, within how they do their mapping, all have these state coordinate systems as designated, and those are what the publications are supposed to be going through. And even states that have more issues than we do, like California, where they have 6 different zones, that's still their California coordinate system that they publish in. So just something to keep in mind. And I apologize, I had COVID, so my voice is shot.
All right. I appreciate the effort and the passion. Yeah, with that, thank you all so much. Sorry, went a little bit over, but I'm happy to have a very robust discussion on this and on the other topics. As always, I appreciate all of your time, and we'll see you guys in October.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.